We need to make sure that there are places for the next generation to buy. Because if we don't, honestly, we're just going to be shortchanging ourselves. We're going to be shortchanging our economy. We're going to be keeping wealth out of the hands of middle-class families. We really need to address this issue. And I have faith that we're going to do so and that Latinos will continue to drive the housing industry well into the future.
Hi, welcome to the Housing on Ramp. This is a podcast for beginners, experts, and innovators in real estate and data science. This is where the Polygon research team and our friends share thoughts about housing, AI, careers, and everything in between. This is the fourth episode of Housing on Ramp, and today we have with us Jaimie Smeraski. She is a Senior Policy Analyst for the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. At NAHREP, Jaimie supports the organization's public policy and advocacy efforts, along with its foundation, the Hispanic Wealth Project. I also am very honored to have Lyubomira with me. How's it going, Lyubomira?
It's going great. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm definitely very excited for our conversation with Jaimie. But before we start, do you mind talk a little bit about why Jaimie is here today and how everything started with our conversation?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Well, first of all, I've known Jaimie since 2020. Jaimie became a user of Polygon apps. We began to support Jaimie and NAHREP with analysis, with actually making certain data sets accessible so that they can derive their insights a little bit easier and tell the story that they wanted to tell. And we've worked very closely in the last, before you went into maternity leave, we worked very closely on additional project as well, on analyzing the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances, which was an amazing experience. And the reason that we are now here on this podcast is because Polygon is working with Fannie Mae's future housing leaders to bring more information about careers in the housing industry and data science together. So, careers in that intersection of housing and data science.
Thank you, Lyubomira. Jaimie is here with us. Jaimie, Lyubomira has given us a brief introduction, and I think you have a very interesting story about how you got into real estate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well. So I got started in public policy, working at NAHREP, and I kind of honestly I fell right into this role. I initially started in NAHREP's communication department. So when I was hired, I was a communication major in college, and right after college, I got an internship at NAHREP in their communication side. So I did a lot of their social media, marketing, emails, kind of writing press releases, things along those lines. And while I enjoy writing a lot, marketing it just really wasn't my strong suit. I am not as social media savvy as other millennials are. But I did really love the organization and I loved our mission. You know, NAHREP, we are a nonprofit, we're a trade association. But what makes us a little bit different is that we are very mission driven, and our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic homeownership. And I just fell in love with the organization and everything that we stood for. And so even though marketing wasn't really kind of my area, I did want to stay with the organization. So after I left the communication department, I spent a couple of years on our meeting planning team. So really helping with operations, organizing our large scale conferences, which was really amazing. And I got to meet a lot of our chapter leadership across the country doing that. But it wasn't until Noerena Limon came on board. She is our EVP of Public Policy. When she came on board, she was really the first person within our organization that was charged with creating an entire department that focused just on advocacy work. NAHREP has always done advocacy work. Our executive leadership and our board has had great relationships with the administration and with legislators, and we've really been a part of that conversation since our inception. But what we didn't have was a department that really drove grassroots advocacy efforts. And so that's when Noerena came on board. That was kind of her area, was that she really wanted to leverage what we consider to be our most important asset, and that's our people. NAHREP is filled with really passionate, really knowledgeable, well-connected individuals that are on the front lines, that are out there in the market, that are seeing what is happening with consumers, and then connecting those people with the decision makers, with legislators, with other stakeholder groups, and ultimately that's what we're looking to accomplish. Yeah, I shared an office with Noerena when she first came on board, and she asked me, she was saying, what do you want to do? What's your like your passion? What is it that you want to be when you grow up? And I always said, I wish that I could be a speech and debater for life. That was my favorite thing that I did in college. I was the captain of my debate team, and I actually stayed on to coach for a few years after I left the school. And I was like, if I could just do speech and debate forever, that would be my dream career. And she said, that's advocacy work right there. And so that's how it all got started.
A great story, Jaimie. I really love that story. And also the perspective that in the housing industry, not everybody is a builder or a mortgage banker. There is a space for policy, and that's actually a big part of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I'm curious, how have you found, you know, this connection between speech and debating and advocacy work to hold up?
Oh, I mean, I would say, well, for one, I was on the speech and debate team, but the debate was my favorite part. And I did what's called parliamentary debate. And you would be given a prompt, and you would have 15 minutes in order to create a case, and then you'd have 45 minutes to argue it. And so it would be, for example, like, you need to increase more representation for women in government, and then you would actually have to implement a policy in order to accomplish that. Or if you were on the opposition side, you'd have to tear apart the other team's policy. But really, you have to be creative. You have to be able to influence people. I think that when it comes to advocacy work, having the skills to persuade is incredibly important. And persuasion is a big part of being, a speech competitor, and it's a big part of advocacy work as well.
Could you talk a little bit about how data is utilized and how data is like considered at NAHREP?
I think data is critical. You have to be able to back up what you're saying. So you're going to go out and you're going to share with decision makers, and you're going to tell them this is happening. And you can give anecdotal stories all day, but having strong data to back that up is incredibly important. And so at NAHREP, we use a lot of public data sets, as well as in unique individual research. But we use a lot of public data sets, whether that's census data. With our work with Polygon, we use both census data. We also use a lot of HMDA data, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. As Luba mentioned, we did a special project using the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances data. I mean, as I mentioned, our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic homeownership. And one of the biggest data points that came out of that partnership when we were looking at the Survey of Consumer Finances data is that we found that Latino homeowners have 28 times the wealth of Latino renters. So that means the median net worth for Latinos that own their own home, if I remember correctly, it's around $178,000 compared to Latino renters at just $6,000. So when we're meeting with stakeholders, when we're meeting with legislators, when we're telling them that access to homeownership opportunities is the number one way that we're going to close the wealth gap, having data, having statistics like that really underscores the point that we're trying to make. And it's easy for our members to remember pieces like that, where it's like, that's, eye-opening. And then they're able to go out and share that with their communities.
What we want to do is do exactly that, make it enable organizations like NAHREP and people like you in your career to make the use of data seamless. And instead of you crunching the numbers, you can just begin to ask the questions against the data. What does it mean? Why? And what is the impact? And just derive much more powerful insights. So this is super exciting for me to hear that
I love it.
and to work with you. I mean, it's been a joy so far.
I feel the same.
Yeah, I would agree. Technology and data is supposed to serve us and serve our communities. Speaking of community, you already talked a lot about how you value community, and I know you didn't start out doing exactly the same work that you're doing right now at NAHREP, but you stayed because you like the people that you worked with. So, what would you say community mean for you, and how do you, in your work, cultivate and maintain it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think of community, I picture a group of people who are united for a common purpose, developing friendships with one another, working together for the greater good and for that shared purpose. One of my favorite parts of our organization is that we really are that kind of community. We call it our NAHREP Familia. It's different when you're at a NAHREP event, and I'm sure Luba can say
Yeah.
that she experienced this as well. But people are hugging each other when they see each other. Our national and chapter leadership are really incredible. They want to help each other. They're passionate, and not just about their own businesses and what they get as a benefit from attending, but they're passionate about our mission, and they're passionate about helping each other to succeed. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. Our conferences are just really, really warm. And I think that is how you maintain the community, is that you're willing to be there for each other. You give everything that you have, and then you share that common purpose, and you're constantly talking about that your what is your why are we here? And I think that NARP does a really good job of cultivating that.
I can definitely confirm this. That's what struck me during the latest convention that you had here in DC in middle of March, is that sense of community. And what I distilled is also the shared sense of belonging in that
Mm.
room with each other and trying to help each other and advice. I mean, people are so active in the way they would and willing to share their perspective, unprompted,
Yeah.
honestly, generously. And that was really, for me, quite impressive. And I was so happy to be there with you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that's fun about our events is that it usually has a lot of really great music and a lot of really great food as well. We try to incorporate cultural elements into our conferences that I don't think you could find anywhere else.
And by the way, I'm a member of the DC chapter of NAREP.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love it.
And Jaimie, could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the biggest challenges that you have faced so far in your career?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say that the biggest challenge that we're facing from an advocacy perspective, when it comes to housing, I mean, I think housing is one of the biggest issues of our generation, and we are very clearly in a housing crisis. But the biggest challenge that we face is that this issue is a hyper local issue, and there are many different places. There's not just one fault to the problem, and when you go to address it, you have to address it at many different levels. We consider the number one barrier to advancing sustainable Hispanic homeownership to be the lack of affordable housing inventory. And by affordable, I mean something that the average entry level homeowner or entry level family, first time homeowner can purchase. And the problem being that that issue is hyper local. So oftentimes it's something that has to do at the city level. So it's individual city councils that have, the ability to change zoning or land use regulations, have the ability to make it cheaper and easier to build housing in the area. And so it's difficult to advocate on behalf of this issue because it's just so widespread, and there's not just one place you can go, and there's just not one policy that's going to fix it. And so I'd say that's our biggest challenge, is that we have to kind of think differently. How do we approach this in a way that hasn't been done before? I mean, one thing Noerena likes to say is that major problems are problems because they're not easy to solve. If it was easy to solve, they would have fixed it by now. But I would say that's our biggest challenge, is that we feel that the number one barrier to advancing our mission is housing inventory. And addressing the housing inventory crisis requires a wide variety of different action steps at different levels, whether that be at the city and local level, the state level, and the federal level all together. And implementing a grassroots strategy to tackle that is vast, and there's a lot of components to it. So our strategy has been to, one piece at a time, and to go and set goals at different levels, and take it one day at a time, because that's all you can do.
Yeah, I mean, those big challenges, including the affordable housing, usually don't come with an instruction manual. And so you, just like parenting, so you have to be you have to put yourself into, the generation that we are here, the local markets. You have to find that very sweet spot of confluence of different things, and then think creatively out of the box and begin to come up with innovative solutions. But usually, also in my experience, yeah, the biggest challenges require the biggest effort and creativity, and usually new look and new perspective on solving them.
Yeah.
Rarely there is something tried and true that you can repeat in order to
Yeah.
solve those huge problems.
There's no silver bullet, that's for sure.
So, would you say the State of Hispanic Homeownership Report is part of that effort to solve this bigger problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, our State of Hispanic Homeownership Report really analyzes the trends that we're seeing in the market year over year. And so it's looking at how Latinos are faring when it comes to homeownership acquisition, other economic indicators, but it's also looking at the barriers to advancing our mission. So we've outlined some of the issues that we've seen with housing affordability. I mean, we've seen that home price appreciation, especially in areas where Latinos tend to be concentrated. I think the states of Arizona and Florida both saw the highest home price appreciation last year. And those two states are home to a large subset of Latinos. I think it was like 26 and 28% respectively. I can't remember the exact number, but it was astonishingly high. And so we're seeing really high home price appreciation. We are seeing underproduction happening. So that means that they're simply not building enough units to keep up with demand. We're seeing issues that are like our institutional investors. So we have very few housing stock available, and the stuff that is available is more often than not, being swept up by institutional investors. There are some areas that are seeing upwards of 40% of their housing stock being bought by large companies, not owner occupants. We did a qualitative interview with our members and some of our top producers, our buyer's agents, last year, and they really highlighted some of these issues. And one of them being that Latinos are twice as likely to use FHA loan products. But in this tight housing inventory environment, FHA buyers are just not able to compete. There's a strong seller's bias against FHA. And so a lot of our members are saying, hey, we're trying to convert our clients over to conventional because that's the only way they'll get their offer looked at. And in some instances that works, and in sometimes it doesn't. And so we like to identify some of those trends. We listen and we look at the data, we see what's happening in the market, and then we utilize that data when we make recommendations for policy. So all of the stories, all of the data that we collect that dictates what it is that we share with our legislators, and we share with the administration and those that are decision makers when it comes to housing policy.
It seems that any kind of loan will be difficult to compete against institutional investors. It is the cash that the institutional investors usually bring to the table that makes the sellers really excited,
Yeah,
because it cuts down the the time to close,
yeah,
and everybody's happy at the end of the day. But it seems that we just spoke about community. This is where that sense of community might help, because a seller might say, I would like my community to continue to be the way it used to be after I leave. So mostly friends and families. With institutional investors, you don't know those people. So that could be, actually, for me, when I moved to my house, when I was buying it, the sale, it was a for sale by owner here in
hmm,
Washington DC. And he, again, this was 1999, there were multiple offers, and he said, well, I think you would be very good for this neighborhood with a little baby in our hands. And so we were not the highest bidder for this house, but he used his judgment to say, I think you would be good neighbors to my neighbors. And to this day, on both sides of me, the neighbors are talking about him,
yeah.
and we all remember him.
I think that's a great story. I mean, one of the things that we have to think about is how can we incentivize sellers to sell to owner occupants. And one of the things that can be tricky, though, is that sometimes having it could be a fair housing violation by, it introduces bias, like people like sending like letters to the owners telling them about themselves. That also can introduce bias there. So how do we incentivize sellers to sell to owner occupants, while also, treading the line that it's not just up to their discretion? And so that's some of the policy solutions that I think will be really big in the coming months, in the coming years. How do we address this issue from a policy perspective that also, keeps to our standards when it comes to fair housing as well?
And how do you envision the future for the state of Hispanic homeownership?
I think that we're going to see that Latinos are continuing to drive homeownership in the U.S. I mean, we know from data, from the Urban Institute, that the prediction is that Latinos are going to account for 70% of new homeowners over the next 20 years. And these predictions are based on demographics. So it's based on population growth, household formations. Latinos are young. We have a median age of 30, and that's just aging into prime home buying years. I see that these trends are only going to continue. But it's not guaranteed. We do have to make sure that we address the housing crisis. We have to make sure that we are building enough homes for people to purchase, that we're making it so that there's entry level affordable homes. So those are homes that are built for first time home buyers. Those are condos and townhomes. That we're looking at our zoning. So make sure that we're upzoning in areas and job centers. We need to make sure that there are places for the next generation to buy. Because if we don't, honestly, we're just going to be shortchanging ourselves. We're going to be shortchanging our economy. We're going to be keeping wealth out of the hands of middle class families. We really need to address this issue, and I have faith that we're gonna do so, and that Latinos will continue to drive the housing industry well into the future.
Both on the demand and supply side, I would say there's a lot of participation in the construction industry as well on that
Yeah,
side. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Now let's go to some of my favorite questions.
Okay.
Jaimie, who are some of your biggest mentors, and why are they your mentors?
Yeah, so I mean, Noerena is definitely a huge mentor of mine. Honestly, she wouldn't have it any other way. She's constantly asking me about, what are my ambitions? What do I want to learn? What do I want to do next? She has really made it her mission to ensure that her staff, including my other colleagues in our department, and we also have interns throughout the year, different interns each semester. But it's her mission to ensure that we have access to those opportunities, and does everything she can to make sure that we get there. And she says that, her passion and her mission is to cultivate the next generation of leaders, the next generation of Latino leaders in the economic policy space. And so I feel very fortunate that I work for someone that is so passionate about that. And then besides Noerena, I would also say that my own mom is a huge mentor of mine. My mom owned a mortgage company when I was a kid, so she was very busy. She owned her own business in the housing space, but she was also super mom. And today she's super grandma to my own baby. And I look to her example for how you really can have it all. You can have a fulfilling family life and a really robust and vibrant career, and just really have a lot of fun along the way. So I definitely look to her example when I'm trying to balance that work life and family life and my community within my own family.
Now I'm going to ask you to put on the mentorship hat yourself. If you could give a piece of advice for someone starting out, either in housing or public policy, or in the intersection of housing and public policy like you are, what would that advice be?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I would say my biggest piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to start small. Housing is so overwhelming. There's mortgage lending, the real estate side, there's regulatory hurdles and challenges, there's land use and zoning. I mean, the list goes on, and it's incredibly complex to understand the nuances and how all of it works. So when you're first starting in this industry, it might feel very overwhelming. So I would suggest to tackle one issue area at a time, and just to constantly ask questions. I mean, even people that have worked in this field for decades and decades are still learning. And honestly, things are changing every single day. So you kind of have to relearn even after you've learned something the first time. So I would say, ask questions, start small, and have fun with it. Public policy is only fun when you get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's a process, and I suggest internalizing that you don't need to be an expert right away, and that you don't need to know everything. That sometimes the best thing you can do is ask questions and say, hey, I see this as a problem. What do you think is the right solution? How can we find an answer to this solution, to this issue?
Well, that's a great advice, Jaimie, for anybody, actually, not only for interns, anywhere in your career.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like it definitely applies to a lot of things in life. Um, and how would you define? I don't want to use the word success, but how would you define the sense of fulfillment you get from your work?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I like to say that I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so I think that finding something that you love doing, and something that does, every job that you have, any job that you have is going to feel tedious sometimes, and it's going to feel like a slog sometimes. But if most of the time you're excited about the work that you do, and you're enjoying it, and you feel like you're making a difference in some way, hold on to that. And don't be afraid if it's not the thing that you think is going to be your final destination, because I think that throughout everyone's career, you transform over time. And so I would say embrace where you are, find something that you absolutely love and enjoy doing, and be willing to roll with the punches and adapt over time. And if you can find that, then that's the definition of success for me. When I'm excited to be at my job, and I'm excited about the work that I'm doing, and I feel like I'm making a difference in some way, whether it's a big way or a small way, that makes me feel really good. And I think that would be how I define having a successful career.
And do you have maybe three book recommendations for us, or like three any kind of resources that you really recommend for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I must admit that I'm not an avid reader. unless you consider endlessly scrolling Reddit forums to be reading. But I do have a few book recommendations that I think are helpful, especially for people that are passionate about housing or are looking at the racial and ethnic wealth gaps or into advocacy work. So the first, I would say, the must read book for anyone in the housing industry, especially if you're going to be in the housing advocacy space, would be The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Now, this book describes how our federal, state, and local policies played a direct role in racial segregation, the effects of which we still see today, and housing plays a big role in that. So I definitely recommend that any new housing advocates to read that book. It's definitely a cornerstone. Another book that I really like is it's called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. Like I mentioned earlier, being able to influence people, whether that's your legislators, so when you're actually meeting on behalf of housing policy, or a lot of the work that I do has to do with volunteers. But being able to influence people and get them excited about your issue areas and about what you're working on is critical. And so I definitely recommend that book. He kind of breaks down different tactics and gives really cool case study examples of how those influence strategies really worked. I read that book in college and I absolutely loved it. And then my third book, I chose Barrio, America, How Latino Immigrants Saved the American City by A.K. Sandoval-Strausz. At NAHREP, we're super passionate about immigration and reforming our immigration system. This book really demonstrates using data how Latino immigrants have made our cities more dynamic, have made them more stable by purchasing homes, opening businesses, reviving local economies. And, today you hear a lot of political rhetoric surrounding immigration, but we know that it's going to play a critical and pivotal role in our American prosperity. And I think this book does a really nice job of illuminating that. So I definitely would recommend that for anybody who is passionate about immigration.
I know Color of Law. I have it and I've gone through it, but the other two I don't, and I'm definitely they're going to be on my reading list.
All right, I love it.
They all sound very intriguing. And lastly, do you currently live in your dream house? If not, what does your dream house look like?
Oh man. So, I would say that my house isn't my dream house, but it is a dream to own my house. So we bought our house 5 years ago. So right before things got really real. We were in a crisis then, but the housing inventory was tight then, but nothing like it is today. So our house is a little older. It was built in the late 50s, and I don't think it's been majorly renovated since. So my husband and I like to call it's not a flip, it's a roll, kind of a slow roll. We're just redoing one piece of it at a time, and eventually it'll all be fixed up. But honestly, I love our home, and I feel very lucky that we were able to buy a house. There are, I'm in my mid 30s, and a lot of my friends have not been able to achieve homeownership yet because it's just too expensive and too difficult. And, when you compound student loans and everything on top of all of that, it makes it really tough. So while my house maybe isn't my dream forever home, it really is, it's my dream to own a home. And I feel incredibly lucky that we were given the opportunity to do that, because if we were to try to buy our house today, we couldn't afford it with the way that house price appreciation has gone and how the crisis has gotten so much worse. So I feel very lucky and honored to be in a home that I own.
Thank you so much for being here. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much. I really had a nice time.
I did too.
Well, I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Housing on Ramp podcast. It was a pleasure to hear about Jaimie's journey and her work in the policy space, and we hope you enjoyed listening. If you like our podcast, make sure to follow us. On Spotify, you can also scroll all the way down in the episode to check out our polls and questions. If you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to drop your comments, questions, topics you'd like to hear about in the future. And if you have suggestions for future guests, those are also very welcomed. Finally, you can also give us feedback that I will personally read at info@polygonresearch.com. You can also find us on Twitter at PolygonRead, and on LinkedIn we are linkedin.com/company/polygon-research. Be sure to visit our website at polygonresearch.com to read about us and the newest developments in mortgage industry data science. All right, take care, and we'll see you soon.